So today we are heading up a hill in the Torridon area with my keen group of hikers. These are guys who are very strong hikers, so I'm really excited to get up into the snow. But we're starting a bit late because we've stopped to photograph the reflections that I'm sure you can see behind me. So that's been pretty. that's been pretty good to photograph. But yeah, we're starting a little late. We've got about 6.5 kilometers to the top of the mountain or top of the hill, and 500 meters of elevation gain. The peaks are still in cloud, the actual summits, so we're hoping that'll lift. But even if it doesn't, because we're working with fresh snow, I'm sure it'll make for some great photos. We've just stopped briefly to shoot some telephoto images of the surrounding mountains which are catching the light. It's actually a difficult choice to make when you're trying to complete a hike like this, whether you stop to take photos or whether you continue in the hope that when you get to your location the light will still be good. But since we still have a fair way to go, we have stopped, and I have to say the scenery is looking pretty incredible at the moment, more or less the best I've seen it. So really excited for the rest of today. We've had another photo stop. This is a great spot for a wide angle shot. The sun is not out at the moment, but when it was, these rocks behind me were casting lovely diagonal shadows across that clean snow there in the foreground, so made for quite a strong image that you could shoot both in portrait and landscape with the diagonal shadows running through the frame. So I think a few of us have got quite nice shots of this kind of scene, and it's not too bad looking the other way as well. So there's still loads to shoot, and well, we're barely getting started with our day. The hill we're going up is actually this one to my right, so we haven't got too much ascent to do, but it's still going to take us a while because we've got a few kilometers of walking yet. It's bright enough at the moment that you can actually shoot pretty easily without a tripod, and although it's clouded up, we're easily getting the kind of shutter speeds that we need to shoot handheld. We found this lovely pool behind us with a few grasses bending over in the reflection with the mountain behind, so this should make for a really great shot for pretty much everybody, I think. So this is a really nice spot to find. There's almost an abstract shot here, to be honest, with the ice and the I've got to be honest, this area is so good I barely even know what to do with myself. We've got these stunning grasses and snow-covered ice drifting out into this loch. Perfect side light, just catching the crags up at the mountain up there. And then over here the guys are shooting this lovely curvaceous line leading to a couple of trees. So I mean, you just can't go wrong here. It is absolutely magic. So I'm just going to shoot as much as I can and focus on that, and then maybe do a bit more videoing afterwards. But I'm pretty excited. We've switched to shooting this tree now behind me, and it's a shot that really writes itself with an amazing arcing line of ice leading straight to these birch trees. So pretty lucky to come across a scene like this. Just absolutely beautiful. And that was unfortunately the last time I got to record any video on that particular day, because one of the clients dropped their cameras, and since they used a Sony camera, I handed over my A7R2. So I then just took stills on our way up the mountain. All the time we were hoping that we'd get good conditions at the top, and you can see on the way up it was already starting to look quite beautiful as the sun came down and there were gaps towards the horizon. I did take this still on the route up. I just love the way the mist here is capturing the sun's light. I think that's particularly beautiful. And here you can see one of the guys trying to catch us up. He stopped to take a photo, so he was following our footprints back up the hill. And there's the final part of the ascent to the top of the hill. And then the rather bleak environment we found ourselves in at the top. Unfortunately, the cloud had pretty much set in on the tops of the peaks by the time we got there, which is one of the drawbacks, of course, of taking these gambles. Sometimes the best light happens on the route up, as was probably the case when we made this particular ascent. But we did still have some conditions that were worth photographing, at least at the top, and I was quite pleased with the panorama that I shot up there, albeit the light was very, very blue by this point, but the lochen below reflected like a mirror. This is probably the best I managed. Not one for the portfolio, but beautiful all the same. So that really was a pretty fantastic day in Torridon. I've not had many days where I can start shooting right at the beginning of the day and shoot all the way through the day, right to the end, and be very happy with a wide range of shots like that. Anyway, I'll go into my image review, starting with this one, which is a straight reflection shot, a simple shot to get right, hopefully. There are some minor distractions creeping in. There's a bit of a reflection of seaweed down here, but that couldn't be resolved with the camera position alone, so those little minor distractions, they can stay there. They're not a big deal to me. And I've just edited this really to balance the brightness a little bit better. So it's a fairly straightforward edit. One thing that's useful, if you don't have a really clear horizon, obviously I could level the shot with this horizon over here. I couldn't with this shoreline because of the perspective. It would put a slant on the image. But one thing you can do with perfect reflections like this is pick one crag, for example, in the reflection, and use that as a vertical. It should be directly opposite the thing it's reflecting. So that's a good little tip there if you don't have a clear horizontal, because I do occasionally see images where people think that they have the image level, but the reflection gives it away. And if you're attuned to that, then it makes the shot look a bit wonky. This was one of many telephoto shots I took on the day, but probably my favourite one. Very simple. Probably won't make the portfolio, but I love the light transition here, and the different array of mountain structures that you can see in the shot, from snow-covered slopes to these lovely linear crags that you get in Torridon, and to the lower level crags as well, with the bracken and heather coming through and bringing that warmth. So I quite like that image. This was the first place we stopped, and this scene had a lot of potential. I suspect if we'd spent more time here, we might have been able to find some even cleaner compositions. I did end up going for this landscape version over a portrait version, which obviously I haven't shown you, because actually when I ended up shooting portrait, this rock here ended up in the middle of the frame so that I could have this shadow running into the corner of the frame, and I didn't really pick that up at the time. But it did create a bit of a problem in the vertical shot. This one I'm quite fond of. In a perfect world, I would have had all of these shadows finishing within the frame, but actually that wasn't possible because of all the distractions that were effectively at my feet. So I chose to frame it like this. And really the only issue I have with it is this big rock on the right hand side. So that's quite a heavy item on the edge of the frame, but I do quite like this, and it's relatively unusual, and I like that it's not a sunset image again, so that's a contender at least. And this was just looking the opposite way. I was just exposing here for the highlights in the sunlit snow, and then that drops everything else into this lovely blue shadow. So there's a technique there. It's more of a record shot than it is one to keep, but nice all the same. I really enjoyed shooting these grasses. It would have been great if I had a tilt shift lens to get everything within the depth field, so that would allow me to tilt the focal plane so that this ice in the front to the grasses in the back would have been in focus. I could have set up and shot a focus bracket, but there's a few reasons why that would be difficult with this image. One is that you do have these grasses sticking into the out of focus background, and that does create issues when you focus stack, but also the reflections are moving, the grasses are moving, and it would just start to be a bit of a difficult situation. So I'm still happy with that, and of course I have chosen to focus on these grasses in the foreground, so they're the focal point. That one could well end up in my portfolio. This one definitely will. I just absolutely love the color palette in this. Two colors, yellow and blue, and that's it, and just incredible light. I mean, this almost black sky in contrast to the incredibly bright sunlit snow. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about metering for sunlit snow, is that it throws everything else into the deepest shadows and you get this wonderful richness. So I am quite fond of this one as well. Incidentally, I tried to work with this a bit more and step further towards the grasses to bring them into the frame to generate a bit more perspective, but the whilst I knew I would break the ice, what I didn't consider was that those cracks would then allow water to soak onto the snow. So although I didn't ruin this particular shot, I could have done, so I decided it was better to settle with what I had. This was the first version of the trees that I shot, and I must admit I was pretty happy with this shot when I took it initially, but the one I ended up settling on was when the snow started to fall, and that just gave an extra dimension to the image. I would love to print this big because the detail is amazing, and this snow gives a fantastic sense of depth. And I like how the trees even disappear a little bit because the snow has reduced the contrast to an extent. And this line in the ice is almost otherworldly. On the subject of composition here, this to me works really well compositionally, and I think there would be a tendency for some photographers to look at a way of placing these trees on a third as opposed to centrally, and in fact some of the clients did attempt to do that. I don't have shots to show you the effect of that, but all I would say is that when you're making those compositional choices, it's really important to understand the impact that it's having on the balance of the rest of the image, because it essentially threw all these curves out of alignment and created a sense of imbalance in the foreground just so that you could put the trees off to the left, which to me didn't work at all. This was from earlier actually, so that grasses shot, that abstract was of this small area here, and this wide angle shot I really do love, particularly for this richly detailed foreground. I love these delicate details and the way that the grasses are silhouetted against a reflection of the brightest part in the sky. That's entirely intentional. It makes more of a feature of that foreground. So I really do love this image. Whether other people will, I'm not so sure. There's certainly aspects that I think will make it unpopular, not least that it's very blue, but it certainly ticks the boxes for me. So I kind of wish we were at the top of the mountain when I took this shot. We were on the way up, as I mentioned in the video, in the voiceover of this still. You know, you kind of have to make a decision when you're in these places, whether you go for it or settle with what you have and try to make the best of the opportunity. I'm always inclined to go for it, because quite often the conditions change in ways that you don't anticipate. So occasionally that doesn't work out, and this was probably one of those days, because certainly the light balance and color balance on the way up was preferable. But compositionally, this slope coming in is still a bit too strong for me, and I would just love to have the Locken fully showing there. So it's certainly nice, but I think this composition would have been the one to go for, and I have to say it was a real treat to come up here and see this amazing sort of portal into another world, this lock reflecting the gap in the sky, and the gap there stayed around that area for quite some time, but unfortunately the peak on the left resolutely stayed in some sort of cloud, as did the peaks in the distance here. I mean, in a way, I'm glad. It does give me an excuse to come back to this point, and I think I probably will, because for me the blue in this image is just too heavy, and the light is too heavy. So there's a flatness to the image. Tonally, you can see the sky and the snow are more or less the same tone and color. So there's very little visual variation in the image, other than textural variation. But if it were possible to make the image naturally monotone, so overcast midday kind of light, then you'd get more of that etching look, which might have worked. But I think with this strong blue cast, it doesn't work so well for me. But it's always great to go to some of these points that I've planned and see the scene come together like it has here. So that's my third vlog from Torridon, and thank you very much for watching, and for all of you who commented and liked and shared and so on my previous videos. I really appreciate the support. It's also very necessary for me at this point to encourage me to produce more of these videos, because it's very resource intensive at the moment. It's an exciting thing to learn, so I really do appreciate the enthusiasm as well. It's interesting for me learning the whole storytelling aspect. I have learned a lot from feedback from these 3 videos, and from editing them myself, and so there are certain aspects missing in these videos that I'd like to incorporate in future videos, particularly more discussion around composition when I'm actually in the field, which this video in particular was lacking in. But that's really due to not having a specific plan for what I was going to vlog about. So I'll think about that more in future. But in the meantime, if you could subscribe, that would be really great, because like I say, it does encourage me to keep going with this sort of thing. I should also mention that my book Northwest is still available. This is my last vlog from the Northwest, so it's probably an appropriate time to mention it. So please do pick up a copy if you'd like to support my work. It is full of pretty spectacular mountain panoramas from around the Northwest Highlands, and the vast majority are not on the internet anywhere. So please do check that out.